All right, hello everybody. This is the first ever Tavern Talk. We did something like it last semester, but we're starting over again with a couple of new people, and it should be awesome. So I'll start off by introducing myself. I am Brendan Sargent Balanced, and I'm here with.
I'm Manny, aka Yoda.
I'm
And-
Orion, and I'm Thrawn in game.
Awesome. So I'm here with these two awesome players who have been participating in the weekly so far. And I guess Tavern Talk, I guess I should introduce kind of what we're going to do. We're basically just going to talk about our weekly tournaments, everything sort of involved with that, like our local meta, what decks the finalists used, and then we're going to tie that into how like the overall Hearthstone meta is going. And yeah, any other comments, Annie or Orion, about like what this is?
Yeah, it was just kind of like a way for us to like reach out and like keep up with the community, as well as like giving some of the like newer players or just like regular players, I don't know, just like a fun little podcast to like chill and talk about Hearthstone a bit. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
All
think
right.
you guys summarized it nicely.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we can get right into. Oh yeah, first let's congratulate Orion right here, Orion Thrawn, who won this weekly as well as the last weekly. He
Yeah.
had an outstanding performance this week and didn't drop a single game of any match. So, good job, Orion. That was pretty impressive.
Thank you. It's definitely a good experience.
So I hope you continue tryharding in the future.
No, it must be pretty fun to go undefeated.
Yeah, most of us don't get to experience that. So we'll see how we do in the upcoming Hearthstone collegiate championship. That'll be interesting to see because we have some very strong players here. All right.
Yeah, I think the scene's been developing really well, so it's always cool to see.
Yeah, definitely, especially around here at FGCU. I mean, most of the players, like our average player rank was maybe 8, 9, so that's the top 10% of players or less, which is pretty cool. All right, let's get into it. I guess we're going to start off by talking about how the most played classes at our tournament were mages, paladins, and warriors. And ironically, we saw that in the final match. The both finalists, Orion and Justin, were each running a single mage, paladin, and warrior deck each. So I guess Orion, why don't you tell us about your choices for those? Don't tell us about the specific decks yet, but just kind of like why you think those classes might be number one right now, or at least most popular for our region. Yeah. Like, why did you choose those decks?
Okay, well, so my decks that I chose for this tournament were Patron Warrior, Freeze Mage, and Token Paladin. I chose the two of those decks, the Warrior and Mage. I chose because they have a good matchup against Secret Paladin, which is a new deck that's popped up recently with TGT, and it's been extremely popular and sometimes very difficult to defeat. And then the Paladin I ran because I was expecting others to expect Secret Pally, so I thought I would throw them a curveball by running something that wasn't that deck and try to cheese some wins that way.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, pretty clever with the curveball. I was actually pretty surprised to see like Mage was at the top. I think like you said, you were expecting Secret Paladin, and I was too. A lot of people were. And Warrior makes some sense, but still, like Mage was one of those classes I don't think people thought got like a huge amount out of TGT compared to some others. So I thought it was really interesting to see that it actually did end up being like the most popular one out of, at least like in our like little local meta. So I don't know, like what do you guys think about that? Like why is Mage ended up being like the most played class?
It probably has to do with like they have a lot of archetypes. We noticed that in our local meta, out of those 9 mage decks that were played, more than half of them were a different archetype than each other. To list a few, we had Mech Mage, Tempo Mage, what else?
Freeze Mage,
Echo Mage, and Dragon Mage. I think were the 5.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think there were any more. So, yeah.
All right.
Dragon Mage.
Hey, Dragon Mage is pretty legit.
So, I mean, technically there were only like 1 or 2 of each mage deck. So at this, like, mage was popular, but it was more separately popular. if that makes sense.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I
Yep.
guess which
Yeah.
makes sense. Just a lot of archetypes. It's really hard, like, to face a mage and like determine like what you want a mulligan for, and just trying to like figure out what they're playing. Especially because you can kind of hide it for a little bit too. Like if you just kind of like pass turn 1, mad scientist turn 2, there's not a lot to go off of. So
Yeah,
that definitely has some advantages. And then yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So we can go ahead and get into the finalist decks now. Um, let's see. What do we want to pull up first? Let's pull up Justin's decks. I'm trying to remember which ones he had. He had a Mech Mage. The first match was a Mech Mage versus Orion's Freeze Mage. So why don't we talk about that match a little bit? Now that we have Orion here to talk about it, that'd be cool. Yep, and I see we're pulling it up now. We have Justin's Mage deck. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Manny, do you see anything interesting that might be different from normal Mech Mages or slightly?
I mean, as far as I know, this seems to be like what Mech Mage kind of like evolved to right before TGT came about. There was a period where like with BRM, it kind of like fell off a bit, and then I started seeing it coming back with these like the Mana Worms and then the Fel Reavers in particular. So
Yeah.
this seems to be like the pretty standard like I guess like pre-TGT Mech Mage, which I mean it's not like the deck I don't think got too much out of TGT, but it also didn't need too much. Like it is just at its core just like the Sport Flood aggro deck.
Yeah. How do you both
So
feel about Fel Reavers? Like, I noticed that was a huge addition to Mech Mage recently after, right before TGT started. Like, they added the Mana Worms and the Fel Reavers. I agree with the Mana Worms, but I'm kind of not a huge fan of the Fel Reavers. But what do you guys think?
I don't know. Do you have any like thoughts on this, Orion?
Yeah, actually, I really like the Fel Reavers in this list because while they do burn cards from your deck for every card your opponent plays, they do have to actually deal with the Fel Reaver, or it threatens 8 face damage every turn. And I feel like this card is somewhat more consistent than the Mad Scientist and Secret Package, which sometimes will just give you a Zombie Chow, which you certainly don't want. Or it could be like it does. The Mad Scientist Secret Package does force some awkward plays by your opponent, but then again, so does the Fel Reaver, because it's such a huge threat, and they might have to make a suboptimal play to deal with it per turn. So I definitely agree with putting Fel Reavers in this list.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. See, my thing is like I love Fel Reaver. I think it was always like a generally like pretty underrated card, and I was always like surprised to see it like not popping up in aggro lists more often. Especially because now and then you might run into players that don't really know how to play against it. Like if they see a Fel Reaver and they just dump a bunch of like low cost cards, it's like, oh, I'm milling you, and then they get hit in the face for 8 damage next turn. It's like, oh wait, what did I do? I didn't actually deal with this thing.
Exactly.
But for me, those is I mean, me personally, when I'm playing like an aggressive mage, I do miss the mirror entities. So that's like my only thing with it. But I don't really know how you would like fit both the Fel Reaver package and the I guess the Mad Scientist with entities.
Yeah, because
I guess
everything
your
else
mileage may vary on that. Yeah,
everything
else is pretty core.
gory.
I guess you could take out both the worms and portals, which I wouldn't mind that list, because you do lose like the aggression from the mana worms. An unstable portal can win you games, of course, but I feel like
it's not the primary win condition.
Yeah, and I feel like you can get a bit more consistency out of like a Mad Scientist and entity. So I'd say like if I were personally running the list, I would like to keep the entities and the Fel Reavers, because I think that makes for just a strong package.
Okay.
But other than that, like the list is pretty solid. There's nothing like inherently like wrong with it or anything if you do want to keep the worms and portals. So.
Yeah. So the only thing, I mean, I guess Fel Reaver is one of those cards that obviously it can win you the game by itself, and it can obviously backfire too. We saw that in this game versus Thrawn's Freeze Mage, it actually did backfire. First, he had it in his initial mulligan. After he mulliganed it, he drew it. And it sat there the entire game. He couldn't play it on curve against Freeze Mage because you just can't. It's a Freeze Mage. They'll freeze it and mill you out. So he saved it in his hand as kind of his like last backup YOLO card. But we saw Orion, you were able to deal with it by freezing it multiple turns, and then you actually milled out the last, I believe it was 14 cards of his deck, and that alone won you the game.
But most decks can't do that, so.
That's true.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just one real quick. Yeah, I mean, another thing is like how much better would like the entity package have been? Because Freeze Mage deals with entity pretty well by just dropping a Doomsayer into it
Right.
and auto clearing your board. So while yeah, Fel Reaver isn't like I guess good in that matchup, Mech Mage isn't good against Freeze Mage in general. So it's like,
No.
you're I guess you're not talking about like Fel Reaver versus entities as much that matchup. You're really more looking at like if you have like a Lothab in there.
Okay.
And that's
yeah.
like the only thing I could really see like switching that around. So I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things like yeah, FL Reaver lost that matchup, but like how winnable was that matchup to begin with?
Yeah.
But that's something to keep in mind.
True.
Orion, any interesting things about your Freeze Mage deck that you want to mention? Anything different that you like to do in it? What variation?
So I think my Freeze Mage list might differ slightly from some in that I choose to omit Loot Hoarders altogether.
Yeah, I noticed that as I was watching it in because as soon as we get the list up, but I saw you had a Healbot, a Cone of Cold, and an Explosive Sheep. And I believe like all three of those cards are kind of considered like a bit of the flex cards in a Freeze Mage list because it's a pretty
Right.
tight deck list. So I was trying to think of like what you cut, and then I figured out like it must have been like the Loot Hoarders like entirely. So I don't know if you want to go into that. Oh, and you also had like a 1 of Blizzard and 2 of Flame Strike. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, Double Flame Strike is attack against Patron Warriors, mostly, because
Yeah.
they might flood the board with like an early wave of patrons, and then they have their second combo. And sometimes you don't have the Thalnos Blizzard in hand, so the Flame Strike is a much easier way to deal with something like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I'd imagine that the Flame Strike would actually be good against all the aggro that's going on as well.
That's true too. Sometimes Blizzard just isn't good enough.
I thought you meant the company Blizzard. I was.
Oh no, definitely not fine. The Blizzard
Okay.
spell.
Cool. So we see the double Flame Strike. Do Freeze Mages usually run 2 Blizzards or no?
I think they usually do.
Yeah,
Okay.
but lately I've seen like lists that'll kind of like run 1 sometimes. I actually saw a few lists that might cut whatchamacallit, an Acolyte for some other kind of early game, which is weird. Oh, actually, I just noticed you don't have a Pyroblast in this list,
I don't.
which is interesting because the only thing I've ever actually seen Pyroblast cut for would be a Malagos. So you actually just lack that kind of like extra finisher entirely. So how did that work out for you?
Well, this Freeze Mage is designed to counter aggro decks a little better than most lists, I would say. Although it doesn't have the Loot Hoarders, I feel like the Loot Hoarders just don't do enough for you, and sometimes I'd actually rather play the Arcane Intellect to get those, because each Arcane Intellect draws an extra card over the Loot Hoarder, so it helps you draw through your deck faster, find your Alexstrasza, find your Flame Strikes, and whatnot, stuff that you need to win the matchup.
Okay.
And against Control, the 2 Arcane Intellects happen to be a lot better than Loot Hoarders, because that 1 extra draw can really make a difference.
Okay.
So you, with your control cards, you went for a more anti-aggro, but then you're running the Arcane Intellects, right? For more, to help against control, since you don't feel like the Loot Hoarders does its job as well.
No.
Correct.
Okay. That makes sense.
Isn't it usually like Arcane, like 2 of Arcane Intellect is pretty core, and isn't it more a question of like Loot Hoarder versus like the Explosive Sheep or the Cone of Cold?
What was that?
No. Well, I was just saying like aren't 2 Arcane Intellects like pretty core in Freeze Mage? So aren't you really like more cutting the Loot Hoarders for something else like the Cone of Cold or the Explosive Sheep?
Yeah, that's true, but I've usually liked having Explosive Sheep and Cone of Cold, but actually in my Freeze Mage list, I've usually either had Loot Hoarders or Arcane Intellect, but not both. That might be different from what most people do, but that's the way I build Freeze Mage.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to have been like a really good meta call because I mean, my understanding is, and I like to play Freeze Mage too, but it seems to have pretty solid win or matchups against like most aggro decks.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but you actually took it a step further and like pushed a favorable matchup to be even more favorable, and yeah, I'm guessing that ended up being like a really solid meta call because there definitely were a lot more aggro decks in this week's tournament than control or even mid range. It seems to have been.
Yeah.
I mean, was that your experience going through like all your opponents?
What was that?
Was that like your experience going through all your opponents that there were still a lot more aggro decks than mid range or control?
Definitely. Like most of the time when I played the Freeze Mage, it was into an aggro deck. I did play one Control Warrior, or actually Dragon Warrior rather, and I was like, I wasn't expecting to win that by any means, but somehow my Emperor managed to not get removed for 3 turns, and that
Oh
ended up
wow.
swinging the game in my
That usually
favor.
wins.
But that's a rare exception. Like I don't expect to win versus Control with this deck, or Control Warrior at least.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not familiar with the Dragon Warrior list right now, and I guess I would say no one is because the list is evolving. But I think they might cut Shield Maidens to start fitting some of the Dragon package in. So there's some
It
slight
does
things
seem a lot
that,
less defensive.
yeah.
Yeah, they have some control stuff in them. Like I think they're running one copy of Shield Slam, but I can't remember exactly. We actually do have. I was gonna say we can move on to our next match or our next game in the match, which was a Patron Warrior versus the Dragon Warrior. So why don't we go ahead and we can get the Dragon Warrior pulled up and we can see what Justin put in his. Um, awesome. So what do we see? We have the Brawl, but as far as the armor, we have 2 shield blocks. Chilmaw, of course.
Yeah,
He
I
is
remember
running
looking through
2
this.
shield maidens.
He's running 1 Execute, which is a pretty huge cut when you think about. I mean, I think I like any warrior list basically,
Yeah.
Sure.
because
Yeah.
as far as I can see, there wasn't a removal slotted in. There's no rand. Oh, there is the combo of the sparring partner and the Black Knight, which I actually do like that tech. I've heard it passed around before, but there are like a few more taunts being played right now with TGT, particularly if you're going up against other dragon decks. So I
Right.
do like the Black Knight and stuff.
Yeah, there was actually a crazy play. He had both of those in his hand, and you could tell he was wanting to wait for like a big drop. Um, I can't remember the exact situation, but I know he was forced to bring out the BG. I'm sorry, in the third game it was against Orion's Token Paladin deck. He was forced to Black Knight in sparring. He was forced to Black Knight one of his other taunt minions, and then sparring partner had to come out on the Black Knight to in a defensive play. So he didn't get to do the combo, but he did have it. So it was kind of cool to see that. Like that was the first
Yeah.
time I got to see that
Yeah.
combo.
But I
So
think
watch
that's
out
also
for that.
like I'm sorry, you were saying?
I'm just saying, watch out for that.
Yeah.
Is it usually run in a dragon deck, or have other warriors been seeing that?
Sparring partner and Black Knight? No, I don't believe it is. So that is just
I don't think
a
that's
tech that
typical now.
Justin put in, and the Black Knight itself is a tech. So I think he just wanted sparring partner as one because it can be used like as an anti-aggro card, and then the fact that it can then synergize with another piece in your deck to get an extra move against another control deck is pretty nice. Actually, as you were talking about removal, I noticed that this is also managed to cut BGH, so it's definitely a much more a proactive list that wants to kind of like dominate the board and not really like let go and pressure
Yeah,
its opponent out.
Alex Strauss's champion. That's an amazing card. I mean, I guess we're kind of talking about the dragons now, which is fine. But Alex Strauss's champion, just a 2-drop 3/3 charge that you'll almost always be able to activate because of how easy it is to activate Dragon Synergy now after TGT. That thing usually trades 2-for-1 in almost every situation. The only time I really see it not trading 2-for-1 is when you play it on curve when you're going second, and they drop like a knife juggler or something, and they trade play.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it's a very strong card.
yeah, it's I think it's pretty solid, very proactive, and also another point. I don't know, was this the dragon list that you managed to beat with your freeze mage, Orion, or was it a different dragon warrior?
I believe this was the list because I remember him mentioning that there was only 1 execute, and that might have contributed to the lack of being able to remove the Thorson.
Okay. I was going to say another thing about Alex Ross's champion is it seems to, at least in this particular list, but I also think this has been a common cut, is it has replaced Armor Smith as the like kind of 2-drop anti-aggro. So that's
true.
another thing that does hurt like the freeze mage matchup a bit.
Right, for sure.
In particular. So
Big card
front
there.
deck, it seems like it would definitely do better against maybe like other aggro, particularly like board flooding aggro decks than a traditional control warrior. And in exchange for losing that like control matchup or that freeze mage matchup.
Okay, cool. Why don't we go ahead and start looking at his Patron Warrior deck, Orion's Patron Warrior deck that was in the second game of the finals. It was played, Orion played Patron Warrior and beat the Dragon Warrior that we just looked at. Anything you want to say about your Patron Warrior deck, Orion?
I think this list is pretty standard. I noticed some people are starting to throw Cruel Taskmasters back in and replacing shield blocks, and that certainly is a viable option. But I personally like shield block because of it gives you sustain and it helps you cycle. I feel like that's vital to the deck.
Yeah, cycling is definitely a huge part of Patron Warrior. We know, well, first I just want to say you're like the best Patron Warrior player I know, probably one of the best in the continent on the server. Um, climbed up to like rank 25 this season for anyone who doesn't know that. Rank 25 legend, not rank 25, using the Patron Warrior, so that's very impressive. Um, yeah, so I guess just a standard Patron Warrior. He was able to pull off a double frothing combo for lethal against the Dragon Warrior. We were talking about how the Dragon Warrior doesn't have as much armor as a Control Warrior. They're not running like Justicar. We did see in Justin's list that he was running the double Shield Maiden and double Shield Block, I believe. So he was definitely stacking armor. But we saw it was like a almost 50 damage double frothing combo at the end. Orion, why don't you talk real quick about how to beat a Control Warrior with Patron? Because you
Okay,
know how to do that really well.
right. So basically, in that matchup, you aim for a massive one-turn kill combo because throwing individual things out just doesn't do enough, because they'll just clear armor back up and you'll be kind of out of steam. So what I do is try to cycle as much as I can early on and then assemble the super combo that you saw there, and it involves Emperor Thorson when you're holding Warsong, Patron, double frothing, and a whirlwind, preferably 2 whirlwinds, but sometimes you have to use one early on. So
Okay.
Yeah.
and also preferably with a Death Bite equipped, but you certainly don't need that in your combo.
Right.
So 2
But-
whirlwind effects.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, basically, you're looking for an OTK. You can't rely on just kind of like patron flooding the board or something as a win condition. Like you can against certain other decks.
Right, but not against Control Warrior. They'll just brawl it away.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that was really cool to see.
Yeah.
I was trying to count the lethal and I didn't see it. I'm not a Patron player, so I'm not used
Okay.
to
I mean,
lethal
but when in doubt, if there's like Thorson and like 2 frothings and some whirlwinds, you can kind of like assume it's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
To be
Like,
honest,
I've
I
played
don't
the
even
deck
know if
enough.
you got like sometimes you can just kind of like know it's there. You may not have like the exact sequence for like the optimal highest damage by like a
Mm-mm.
point or two, but I mean you overshot it by 20 damage, so
It's definitely there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now there are times with Mage's Ice Block that I know you don't want to overshoot because you need to get close to exact. So.
Yeah. Actually,
Alright.
like any mage deck that's running Ice Block can actually be a pretty big pain for Patron in general.
It was. I was actually playing against one last night where I had gone into fatigue and I wanted to win by putting them into fatigue. And what I had to do was set them to exactly 1 because they had Ice Block up, and it turned out they had a heal bot in hand. And I took a screenshot after I noticed that I had misplayed and tried to go back and see if there was lethal, and it was there, but it was a weird sequence of plays, and I actually had to refrain from using the whirlwind because it set my frothing too high to set him to 1. So sometimes you have to make weird plays against Ice Block.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
And in
So
general, do you want to give a quick blurb on like how someone, because I know like Patron is obviously like a very powerful, very dominant deck. How would someone like, if you are the Control Warrior, how does their matchup go? How do they want to like actually beat out Patron Warrior? Because that matchup, my understanding is like Control Warrior should be like a little bit favored.
Right. So basically, the Control Warrior has to play somewhat aggressively. So that might mean hitting your War Axe into their face if they don't play anything. You certainly want to kill the Acolytes in 1 hit, or if they've already activated it, it's certainly correct to execute the Acolyte, so they don't get extra draws off of it. And if there's a minion on their board that, like say they have an Armorsmith on the board and you play like a Belcher into it, you have to be wary of the fact that they could start a massive Battle Rage off of that. Because Battle Rage is one of those cards that wins that matchup.
Right. All right. So the name of the game seems to be just like you want to pressure them out. Like
Right, yeah. If you're
yeah.
running Lotheb, that's definitely a really good card to have. You drop it when you feel like you're about to be killed. So probably right after the Emperor turn is when you want to drop Lotheb if you're running it.
Okay, cool. So the third you won that game, you were up 2-0, and then the third game we actually saw it was your token paladin deck versus Justin's Dragon Warrior. So we can go ahead and bring up the token pally deck and um, Orion's token pally deck. This is a list that we've seen a lot. We'll talk about after the tournament stuff. We'll talk about our meta, like the overall meta, and this is a list that we did see coming up a lot right at the beginning of TGT, but then it sort of got eclipsed by Secret Paladin. But so tell us, what's your goal with this list, Orion? Like, what are your win conditions? Just kind of tell us about the deck in general, since it's really new.
Okay, so this deck basically starts out a little bit like mid-range Paladin. You see you have the Zombie Chow into Mini-Bot or Juggler, into Muster, and Truce Over, that sort of thing. But what you have in this deck that's different from other Paladin decks is that you can consistently maintain a board presence with cards like Murloc Knight and Silverhand Regents, and to some extent the Garrison Commander. And with this massive board generation that you have, I felt like Gormok was a natural card to include in here, because you can rather consistently proc his effect, and you can occasionally punish opponents for not clearing your board to below 4 minions, which is sometimes harder than it sounds.
Yeah, Gormok the Impaler. I actually just crafted him, and I believe Manny just did too yesterday.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you want to talk about the card logo? Because I know whenever I watch streamers, because I do enjoy my Hearthstone streams, pros are still very much split on the cards. You have some that think like, oh, it's a staple, or it's going to be a staple, and some that are very like, oh, this is just a win more card, and it's not really like accomplishing much that a better, more consistent card might. So I know you want to talk a little bit about this card and where do you think like it's kind of gonna end up? Because I know, like I said, right now I think the community is kind of split on how he's gonna be.
Yeah, I find. Or go ahead, Orion.
Okay, well, I think this card is definitely underrated because, like people say, yeah, you have to have 4 minions on the board. If you have that, you're already winning. But sometimes when you have 4 minions on the board, your opponent also has a considerable board, and you don't want to trade all this in because you'll lose a lot of tempo. So Gormok kind of helps you snowball the advantage you got in the early turns from playing things like Juggler into Muster, and so you don't lose that board, and so you can keep pushing for little bits of face damage here and there with your recruits and whatnot. So he definitely has a place in Paladin, in my opinion, especially if you're running Justicar, which is another card that I think is staple to the deck.
Yeah, definitely. So, and you also see Gormak, of course, in Zoo. Like, there's no reason not to run him in Zoo, because Zoo always has the board flooded. Worst case scenario, as Zoo, you drop him for 4 free face damage as a 4/4 with charge. So,
yeah.
That's not bad either. And like you were saying, just card True Heart, that card, I didn't think it was going to be, like, I thought it might be decent, but when I first saw it, I was like, it might be okay. But in a couple of classes, namely Paladin and Warrior, we see it excelling and dominating the late game. Basically, you drop it on turn 6 or, whenever convenient shortly after that. And with Paladin, you just start generating board presence automatically. Every turn, you get 2 drops or 2 1/1s, and it's very hard to deal with. You kind of have to shut out the game pretty quick, otherwise, because you will lose the late game if they land a good Justicar.
Right.
Like the Paladin, and then with Warrior, they just stack armor for days, and you'll never win.
Yeah, I think before people got to play test it, the only card, and I was like in the same boat you were, where I think like, oh, this looks okay. I think people thought like maybe with Warrior because you're kind of like stacking armor a lot anyway. But I know like people definitely overlook the potential of like Paladin, especially like once you start adding these other like token cards that the Paladin decks are running now, like the Murloc Knights, the Silverhand Reagents, and even like the Garrison Commander. Like after you drop Justicar, like any one of those cards, and you can like immediately flood the board. And I mean, it's like you said, if you're the deck facing that, you have to close out the game fast. It's almost like when a handlock plays Jiraxis. There's such a consistent threat and board presence from your opponent that you just can't, you won't outvalue them. You just
Right.
lost that game right away.
Yeah, except with Justicar, you don't have that 15 health disadvantage usually, so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
That's true, but you're
hopefully.
playing a 6-mana 6/3.
yeah. So
Yeah.
uh,
Although even the 6/3 body ended up being like not as bad if you, especially if you played on an empty board, because
Right.
I
Or
mean,
if
yeah,
you
you
have the
might.
board.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, occasionally you have those games where you kind of just play it and they're like knife juggler will take it out, and that happens. But I mean, sometimes this thing like lives and it can trade up very well, which
Right.
is always gonna be threatening because you know you're playing it on turn 6 and above. So
all right, so very cool deck. I hope that we see more of this deck come around because I know everyone's tired of Secret Pally.
that didn't take long.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about Justin's Paladin deck real quick. I believe it was a secret deck. Let's see. Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a
It looks like
mid-range Seeker deck.
Yeah, mid-range seeker. I think right now the lists are kind of fluctuating between whether to go a full aggro or go a more mid-rangey approach.
Right.
I don't think we actually saw this list him play it in the finals, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, we didn't. This was the one, his third deck that he didn't get to pull out. So for anyone who doesn't know anything about Secret Pally, I will give a quick summary of it. Uh, that card, Mysterious Challenger, is a 6-drop 6/6, and its battle cry is put one of each secret that's left in your deck on the board. We've nicknamed it Christmas Tree Pally because when you have 5 secrets, it looks like a Christmas tree. So
I actually just heard that today. I thought it was pretty clever.
yeah. So it's very it's a very strong deck. It just auto wins a lot of matchups, especially that card. If you can curve out on 6 with that card, you usually just win right there, and your opponents often just concede. So it's a very strong deck, but I also think that a lot of people, since it's kind of new, don't really know how to play around it. So I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about how to play around all those secrets. It's not as hard as it seems. It can feel overwhelming, which is why a lot of people just straight up concede. So, real quick, there's a few things you can do. First of all, your whatever your matchup is. There's Freeze Mage, Patron, Oil Rogue, and Dragon Priest are like the 4 main good counters to the deck. Most of those go like 60-40 with it, just about.
Yeah, at the
Orion, you
most.
said that you played Freeze Mage and Patron this week specifically because you expected Secret Paladins.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so, and then we've noticed on ladder because I've been playing a lot of Secret Paladin, to get used to it, and if you haven't played it, and you have the cards, it's a good idea to play it just so you can figure it out, so that you know how to play against it, since
Yeah.
you see it a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good like general tip against any deck that you know, if you're having a bad matchup, play the deck yourself. Like figure out its ins and outs, and you can generally figure out its weaknesses and its weak turns, and know when to pressure and all that.
Yeah, that goes for, I mean, pretty much any game or sport. Like, if you're having trouble with something, do it yourself. Learn how it works so that you can counter it effectively. But yeah, so Oil Rogue has been giving it trouble, and then Dragon Priest with all of its taunt minions and just value trading and whatnot. Dragon Priest can usually push it out as well. But the main thing with Secret Pally when playing against it is you have to uh, try right before turn 6, because their main play is, okay, flood the board, get it like Zoo, and then turn 6 you drop all these secrets which protect your board and give you this massive board state that they can't deal with because of all your secrets. Basically, Mysterious Challenger is almost like a Loetheb in that sense. So what you have to do is try to clear their board with like a Consecrate or a Holy Nova um, on turn 5, so that when turn 6 hits, they have to drop a Mysterious Challenger with a bunch of secrets to protect basically nothing. That's kind of the main strategy against Secret Paladin. Like, you want to keep their board clear, by however means possible. When turn 6 comes, you can expect the Mysterious Challenger about 90% of the time, because generally they're going to keep it in their mulligan because it's just that strong of a card. Any other advice, guys, about playing against it or playing as it?
Well, I'll talk a little bit on playing against it. So when the Mysterious Challenger is played, typically you'll see either 4 or 5 secrets. If you see less, it's likely that they have some secrets left in their hand. But if all 5 are out, then you know specifically that there's Avenge, Competitive Spirit, Noble Sacrifice, Redemption, and Repentance, because no one runs Eye for an Eye. That card's bad.
I
So
saw someone do it.
I've seen it too,
but
actually, but it
was
shouldn't be in
never
there.
effective. It was like a mage
Yeah.
ping the face. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, you do you, man.
So
One
how your
drop,
sequence
one
of plays?
damage, the enemy hero. All right.
So how the sequence of plays should usually go out is like you obviously want to avoid playing a big minion like Dr. Boom into it because they'll just get set to 1 health. They'll ping it off with something weak, and it'll be really sad. So hopefully you at least have like a small minion on the board, be it like a recruit or like a Sun Tree Protector or something. So you want to attack with that first to proc the Noble Sacrifice, and then once Noble Sacrifice goes off, something will be avenged. And if it's the Mysterious Challenger, you can often Big Game Hunter it, and that's that. And the Redemption will, unless you use a spell beforehand, it'll always go off on the Defender from the Noble Sacrifice. So it's a 2/1 taunt basically that tanks a hit and then comes back to life.
Yep. And then buffs other minions.
Right, yeah. And you want to, if it's not too much of a threat to you, you can leave up 1 minion to make them use their competitive spirit inefficiently. So it turns into a total of 1/1 stats rather than like, say, 5/5, which could be a disaster for you.
Yeah, for those that don't know, the new secret for Paladin's competitive spirit, it only goes off if you have a minion on the board. So if you like know for sure that a Paladin has that, you might want to leave one of their dudes on the board just so that it basically wastes the secret and only makes it a 2/2 on 1 minion instead of a bunch of minions. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Any other comments about Secret Paladin?
Yeah, it just seems like the name of the game is just kind of you want to like hold the board because I think even like the mid-range list at its core is like a bit of an maybe not like an aggro deck but a proactive deck. It wants to dominate the board so it can play the Mysterious Challenger into a safe position where they like buff all their dudes and then overwhelm you with all these secrets. So you just kind of like need to grab the board and try to keep tempo so that hopefully they can start playing their cards inefficiently.
Yeah. Oh, one other deck that I just remembered has a good matchup against it is Zoo, because they usually can just keep the board control completely throughout the entire game, so they can never actually land their Mysterious Challenger flood board combo.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Let's talk about dragons. Manny, tell us about dragons. What's been going on?
About dragons, well, as you know, with TGT, you had particularly like 2 big dragons coming out with Chilmaw and the Twilight Guardians, which have kind of like finally like opened the door to dragon decks in general because dragon decks before with BRM, which you know that expansion was trying to push, had this like awkward gap between their early game and their late game 9 drops. And particularly because they were utilizing this new mechanic Blizzard introduced, where if you hold a dragon, you get these extra effects. So one that was like inconsistent, like you would have dragon decks that wouldn't even run Blackwing Technician because it was almost impossible to get off, and then you would have dragon decks that like want to run Belcher, but then that slot gets clogged with like Dragon Consort and Blackwing Corruptor, so then they have to run Sengens because they still need Taunt. And then the 4-drop dragon from BRM, Hungry Dragon, ended up not being good, so they would run Shredder because Shredder is Shredder.
Yeah.
And you would almost, I remember Kibble actually talked about it because he was trying to make Dragon Paladin work. He had more mechs in his dragon deck than dragon, because he would still have mini bots, the Shredders, and then heal bot because he had to have some way to live.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah, I think the big one that people are seeing now is Dragon Priest, if you want to go into that. I'm sure people have fought a ton of it on ladder, and we saw a few at this tournament actually.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to not see more Dragon Priest because, like, on ladder, it seemed that for one of the days, like it was like the 3rd or 4th day after TGT, it was just all Dragon Priests, and I couldn't get away from them. So I just kind of stopped playing ranked because I didn't feel like playing priests. Dragon Priest is a really interesting deck, and it seems like their curve is just made in such a way that they almost always curve out perfectly, and they have such valuable minions because of the dragon synergy between Rimrest Agent, Twilight Drake, and the Twilight Guardian. Or not Twilight Drake, I'm sorry, Twilight Guardian. And yeah. So between those 3 like early game minions, they have so much board value on top of Priest's hero power. Like after they get their minions on the board, they start hero powering them for value trades. And it's really hard to gain tempo against a Dragon Priest.
I think, particularly against any like aggro aggressive deck, if the Dragon Priest hits their like 1, 2, 3, 4 curve, that's kind of like a loss right there, because in terms of like the stat value for the mana, I think actually is like the highest value curve in the game, because you have like the 2/3 Whelp, which is already like a zombie chow without the drawback, so that's the strongest 1 drop, and then you have a 2/4 Taunt, which is the strongest 2 drop, and then you get Blackwind Technician, which is a 3/5 for 5, and then you have a 3/6 Taunt, and so on. It's very hard to deal with it if you're like an aggressive deck.
Yeah, it
So,
definitely has a better matchup against the aggressive decks. I think Control can usually outscale it into the late game and usually contain the Dragon Priest. One thing I do want to say is that it's like it became really hype and super popular, probably more because Reynad sort of like hyped it up. I think it's a little bit overhyped personally. Like I don't think it's like #1 deck by any means. TempoStorm.com, which sucks by the way, has very bad rating system with their decks. It's more of a like Orion usually says it's more of a popularity rating than it is an actual like meta ranking rating.
yeah, very much so. And more than that, I don't know if they changed it now, but before it was pretty much they always just had like one person write the article for a bit, so it wasn't very reflective of like a competitive meta versus like a Liquid Hearth, which unfortunately hasn't put out their power rankings for a while. But theirs was always they just kind of sent like questionnaires to like 10 pros. They asked them to rank like these decks 1 to 20, and then they averaged the results, which is much more reflective of, I feel, of like the meta. But yeah, but anyway, onto Dragon Priest.
Yeah. Okay. So Dragon Priest definitely it's strong. It's like don't not run it because I said it's overhyped. It's definitely a strong deck, and you can. It's one of the easier decks to climb with because its games go pretty quickly unless you're against Control. But yeah, so I'd say I'd put it like in the mid tier 2 range. Like once the meta settles down, it'll definitely be like a solid deck to run, but it's not like Grim Patron, warrior. So.
Yeah. I think one of the things in general, it's just like even before TGT, when Priest was regarded as like one of the 2 weakest classes, along with Shaman, a lot of people would still climb ladder with Priest a lot because you're expected to go back against these aggro decks, and Priest had a good matchup against it. And that was like old Priest, which had a good matchup against aggro by having all these like reactive cards to respond to aggression. And now you have Dragon Priest, which is good anti-aggro and like proactive. So you don't have to wait for them to make their move. You just kind of like dominate the board from turns 1, 2, 3 and hold on to it very, very well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like a very different style of priest. It feels more like a mid-range type deck just because you're constantly board presence.
Yeah, just like a more traditional kind of deck. Because priest in general is always kind of stuck with these reactive cards and combos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then we already mentioned the other big dragon warrior archetype is warrior right now. It's not obviously as good as priest dragons, but it's seen play, and I don't think it's bad. I think it involves a lot about your early game if you can draw that Alex Strauss's champion, because that thing just snowballs really hard. Usually gets in like 6 face damage before you can actually deal with it. What do you guys think about Dragon Warrior?
Did you have any thoughts, Ryan? Or?
You can go. I'm thinking.
Okay. Well, I haven't played with Dragon Warrior myself too much. I know Dragon Warrior before TGT was a viable warrior archetype. The consensus was just kind of it was a little bit weaker than Control Warrior, but like Dragon Warrior back then was like you have instead of like Rag and Boom, you have the 9-drop dragons and then Blackwing Corruptors. So the dragon shell was very, very thin. And that kind of goes back to what we've talked about for like TGT was they finally added enough viable dragons that these decks finally really do feel like thematically dragon, I guess. So as for Dragon Warrior in particular, it's more proactive than a traditional Control Warrior, like you said, for Alex Strauss's champion and other things like that. And like the Blackwing Corruptor is a proactive card and things like that. I'm not sure how the list will end up shaping up as of right now. It's just really hard to say because Control Warrior has been like such a strong archetype in the game in general since like beta, and even if it is more proactive, Dragon Warrior is still a control deck, so it's ultimately competing very strongly with Control Warrior. So the main thing is going to be like Okay, yeah, it's viable, it's strong. Is it better than Control Warrior though? Like, would I ever want to run this instead? In what matchups and why? And I know I don't really have the answer to that. I haven't like messed with it too much.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I I laugh a little bit at the saying something stronger than Control Warrior because I personally think Control Warrior is like top 3 decks in the game and always has been and always will be. That's just me personally.
Yeah, no, I could see that.
Um,
It's very, I mean, it's just gotten like very flexible too. It's pretty easy to tech out a warrior, even when like the meta seems to be unfavorable towards it.
yeah.
You know?
So one quick other thing about dragons is I was really surprised to see we saw after BRM a Dragon Paladin was like the only viable dragon deck. It sort of was it was good when it started out, but people figured it out and learned it had some explainable flaws. Um, but I was really surprised to not see. I haven't seen a single Dragon Paladin. I haven't tried it myself yet either, um, yet, and I'm just like astonished because that was like the paladin or the dragon deck to go to because of Dragon Consort.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I was just surprised not to see it. And I think it might just because of Token Paladin and then Secret Paladin just kind of taking the spotlight and making no room.
overshadowing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
overshadowing it
Yeah.
completely.
I think part of it is the new dragon package kind of like answered what other dragon decks were missing before, but the Dragon Paladin is still missing some things that Paladin is missing in general, which is kind of like a strong closer to the game, which I think almost every control deck kind of like wants. And like with Dragon Warrior is still kind of like running Gromosh and things like that, or like and Alex too, of course, for like that 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Mallylog was popular for a while, and that I would say that was maybe the most competitive dragon deck that came out of BRM, even for a little bit before people figured it out. And that was obviously based around like a strong finisher as well.
Hmm.
So I don't know. But yeah, I don't know where Dragon Paladin will end up, and it's like you said, part of that is because Paladin right now is certainly opening up some other like very viable, very strong, and very competitive archetypes. So where does this like Dragon Paladin like fit in? Is it going to be like a mid range? And if it is, why would I run that over like token mid range? And then is it going to be a control? But then why would I run that over a traditional control Paladin, which is also a deck that hasn't like been seen in a while. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so dragons definitely awesome. See a few different archetypes. Hopefully we see Dragon Paladin. I mean, like I hope I want to see it. Uh, I'll probably I'll probably play around with some control Pally Dragon decks, but moving on. We already did talk about the Orion's Token Paladin deck, so we don't need to bring that back up or anything. But I do just want to mention like I want to encourage everyone to try it because it's awesome, and stop playing Secret Paladin because it's not awesome.
Yeah. I'll do the same. I like because I view it, and I think we talked about this before too. It's more of a like an evolution of the old like mid-range paladin, which was I always thought was a very like fun and solid deck. It can be very aggressive, and like the nature of the hero power gives it a very strong late game. So it ends up having like a lot of good matchups because you can like go toe to toe with aggro, and you can go toe to toe with control. But anyway,
Yeah. So Token Paladin. I just built my Token Paladin deck. Like I said, I just crafted Gormuk, so put him in there. My deck's ready to go. I basically copied Orion's deck list because it was awesome. Um, I actually think I'll put after this is over, I'll put the winners deck list. I'll do that every week up on the FGC Esports page so people can see them and look what they do differently and stuff. I think that'd be a good idea.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I'll do that. So lastly, last on the list to talk about is Shaman. Um, Shaman was all hyped up because we finally got viable cards for Shaman because they've been really, in the dumpster the past couple sets.
Just a bit.
So it was really awesome to see them getting all these new awesome cards, and then I saw a few the first day of TGT, and then after that, there's not very many of them. I mean, we see them; they're there, but they're not like what we thought they'd be.
Yeah,
What do you guys
they're not as prevalent as everyone kind of expected, but I know I think maybe part of that is just because everyone's like bandwagoning Secret Paladin right now,
Yeah.
because I think fundamentally like these totem shamans are like just the next step of mid-range shaman. So it is, which is at its core like a deck that used to exist, and people would always rather play like a completely new archetype rather than an upgraded old archetype, which is why at least I think everyone is kind of like gravitating towards Secret Paladin, because it's definitely a list that hasn't been like seen before, like close to it.
Yeah, Orion. Any thoughts on shamans?
What I've noticed actually is that Mech Shaman has almost completely disappeared off the ladder, which I found surprising because nothing really came about to nerf it or make it weaker in any way. But yet people have suddenly stopped running it. Though I still see Patron Warriors and a lot of the other decks that were popular um, before TGT came out.
Yeah, I feel like part of that might be just kind of people were playing Mech Shaman because it was the only viable Shaman deck.
That's true.
Uh, this silly cheese. I think of it as a silly cheese deck. I mean, dealing 18 damage on turn 4 is kind of sick to me. Or turn 3 sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
but so I think a lot of the Shaman players, like myself, we played it a little bit to just play it because it was Shaman, but then
Yeah.
we got rid of it. So now that there's an actual viable Shaman archetype, it's nice to get away from Mech Shaman. That's my opinion on the Mech Shaman disappearance.
Okay.
Do you think
Let's talk
it'll
about some of the
come back?
cards actually for Shaman. The new cards they got, namely Totem Golem, Tuskar, Totemic, Thunderbluff Valiant, and Mist Caller.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
But
so Thunderbluff Valiant, I actually think it's a really strong card. I overlooked it at first, but if you look at the stats, like with the Inspire, it gives one of your totems plus two, at least one of your totems plus two attack. You're guaranteed one totem with it. So it's guaranteed 5-6 stats for a 5-drop. So it's not like bad if you only can get one totem off of it. But I think what makes it really good is that it's very durable. It's got 6 health, so you can't just remove it with your typical shredder or anything. It'll trade really well with minions that have 3 or less health. Um, and it has the potential to win you the game just by snowballing a board full of totems. And it affects Totem Golem, which is amazing.
insane.
Yeah.
What
So
is that? A 5/4 2-drop? Yeah.
so what do
Yeah,
you
I
guys
think.
think? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, were you gonna ask about Miscolor or the
Yes, I
Thunderbluff
was going to ask
Valiant?
about Mist Caller.
All right. Well, real quick on Thunderbluff Valiant, I do think it ended up being stronger than I think most people thought because a lot of people were like hedging on Inspire effects in general, thinking they'd be too slow. But the Thunderbluff Valiant it ended up being like very threatening throughout the game. It's something you have to deal with, and it is just durable enough in that mana slot that it's not as uncommon, I think, as people thought it would be to actually keep it on board and get this incredible board state going. So that ended up being, I definitely think it's a staple. And yeah, like I said, I have seen a few mech shamans on ladder, but from what I've seen, they're kind of trying to hybridize with this new totem package. Like it was a mech shaman, but it was running the Tuskar Totemic and Totem Golem. And I saw one that I think had a one of Thunder Valiant thing, while still keeping the Shredders and Doom Hammers and that very aggressive package that mech shaman is known for.
It's really
So
interesting.
I'll be curious to see how that kind of like list ends up panning out. If there'll be kind of like a more traditional mid-range shaman, and then like mech mid-range that's one's more aggressive, one's more defensive. See how that goes.
Sure. But yeah, so between Totem Golem and Tuskar Totemic, we see a lot of that's like a really solid early game that allows mid-range or totem shamans, whatever we want to call them, actually get on the board and stick on the board permanently for throughout the early game. Before we had Haunted Creepers, and that was it. And Creeper's good, but it's not always what you need. It doesn't trade with anything really well. It's a 2-drop 3/4 in stats, but that's after it death rattles, and it usually stays on the board for a few turns. So turn 4 and 5, the 2/1/1s aren't as impactful as you'd want them to be. They're definitely not as impactful as a 3/4 totem synergy card that can take over the board throughout the early game. Like the dream is turn 1 zombie chow into turn 2 totem golem, turn 3 totem golem, and or Tuskar Totemic in there somewhere with a coin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Totemic is great. At first I thought it'd be kind of bad because you're paying an extra mana for that totem, and I thought a lot of time you would get just kind of the 0/2 healing totem or spell damage totem or taunt. But it actually has turned out to be really good. One tip, always play it on the left side of your minions because oftentimes you'll get a Flame Tongue totem. So you want to be able to attack with whatever minions are on the right side. Um, but definitely very solid cards coming in for Shaman. So it's been really surprising to see not that many Shamans overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I definitely think Shaman is certainly back to being a competitive class. So I can't really like pin down like why it's not played as much. Maybe people are sort of just experimenting with the lists a lot, and there's not a refined one yet. And like I said, there is still a little bit of like Secret Paladin like overshadowing everything, as well as some people just wanting to play like these tried and true decks like Patron that are known to wreck. But I don't know. I definitely don't think like it falling off after a few days is a cause for concern for Shaman. Maybe like not have gotten enough and not being like that strong. Like these are two very strong cards that short up Shaman's early game a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we can go ahead and wrap up now. We've been talking a lot, but it's been good. I enjoyed this first Tavern Talk with you guys. I'm hoping that we can do this every single week on Tuesday nights. I think we'll keep 8:30ish as the time. Maybe move it up to 8:45. We'll let you guys know.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for everyone who showed up, listened. I hope we were able to give you good information and help you on your ladder climb and in our local meta as well. I hope to see everyone next week at the weekly 3 for the Tavern Dweller Circuit. And remember that if you haven't registered on the Google form for the Hearthstone Collegiate Championship and you're interested in competing in that on one of our official club teams, go ahead and do that like right now because we need those registrations filled in because we need to have our team set up by tomorrow. So if you're interested in the Hearthstone Collegiate Championship, do that. It's on the esports page pinned, I believe.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
So
any final thoughts, I guess?
guess we're good. Ryan, you got anything?
This is actually more related to the topic of shamans because I was remembering this. There are actually a few, I think, overlooked cards in Elemental Destruction.
Oh yeah. That was an interesting one that got added.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Do you think that'll like make it into lists if it'll stick around?
I'm actually running a Dragon Shaman at the moment. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to talk about it in the Dragon section or the Shaman section, so I kind of just thought I'd toss something at the end.
Okay.
All right.
But it plays kind of like a control deck. You have like the Dragon Core and that sort of thing, and you have the Totem Golems because Totem Golem. And then I'm actually running Ancestral Knowledge, the 2-mana draw 2 with Overload 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then with all this Overload, it seems natural to include Lava Shock.
Definitely.
And then what the deck aims to finish the game with is a setup of Emperor Thorson into Malagos plus a few burn spells. In my deck, I have Crackles and Lightning Bolts.
Okay, so it plays a lot like a Freeze Mage?
It actually plays closer to Malilock from my experience because it's sort of a mid-range deck that can win with board, but you do have a burst combo, so there's always that to watch out for.
Okay.
And another card that I think has seen almost no play outside of this particular deck that I was experimenting with was the Charged Hammer.
Oh yeah.
You're running that thing?
Yeah.
It's an interesting card. Yeah.
Yeah. So this card, it's kind of underwhelming at first because it's a 4-mana 2/4 weapon, but it has Death Rattle with your hero power becoming deal 2 damage. And so naturally, I thought this card could fit in a deck where you don't want to use your totem hero power often. And it just so happens that this Dragon Shaman that I'm running doesn't want to totem as much. And because of this, I chose to omit totem synergy cards, such as Flame Tongue and the Thunderbuff Valiant, and went for a more dragon-themed deck. Sometimes the totems do still get value from time to time, like a Spell Power into Lightning Storm, but you don't need it necessarily because I have other sources of spell power in Blood Mage Thalnos and the Azure Drakes, so you do have that spell power on demand. But this, once you activate the Death Rattle on this card, it helps you control the board really well versus aggro, or also push for face damage against control. So it might not be the best card, but I think it's definitely overlooked, and I haven't seen anyone else play it, so thought I would give that card a mention.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Thanks for doing that. I was playing when TGT came out. I was playing Control Shaman, and it wasn't too bad, but it wasn't an optimized list, and it was kind of hard. But it went for a similar sort of win condition with Malagos and spells, with not as much. It didn't have any dragon synergy really, other than that. But yeah, So Shaman could have some other archetypes that we might see people start messing with, like that like you're messing with the Dragon Shaman. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like they have potential.
Yeah, definitely. You'll have to show me that deck soon.
All right. I think it's posted on the page, the Southwest Florida page.
Cool. Sounds good. I'll check it out.
All right. And then here, a quick blurb. How do you just real quick on like for this upcoming week's tournaments? What kind of decks or classes do you guys think people will bring? Do you think it'll be a lot like this week, or do you think like maybe Secret Paladin will start to die off a bit? We might see these other ones start to come back, or is it just too hard to predict right now?
It's hard to say. I feel like Secret Paladin, because of just how popular it is, will probably see some play at least. You might see some more Token Pally. Hopefully, I'd be glad to see some of that.
Me too.
You might see some of the old tried and true decks like Patron Warrior, Control Warrior.
Yeah,
those sorts of
things
that people
was
know
there
work.
anyone who actually played Patron besides you at the tournament?
Not this week, no.
Don't believe so.
I actually find that like very surprising, but
so do I. Because Patron,
I guess people do want to try out the new decks, but
that's true. But I had to try hard.
Well, Manny,
yeah, right.
You're our other patron player, Manny. So you not being here this week, cut it down.
I guess that's true. I mean, I like my Control Warrior too, but no, I'm with Orion. I like I put on my tryhard pants one leg at a time, and one of them is patron leg.
Yeah. All right. For me, I think Secret Pally is gonna stay around. Obviously, it was like really hyped up this week, so it's
much more dominant.
Yeah, so we'll see it die down definitely. And I'm gonna say there'll still be a lot of them. You know, you're still gonna want to counter that type of deck.
But it might be like, so like there are 8 Paladin decks, but say like one of them was Orion's Token Paladin, and then the other 7 were Secret. So it might be a more even split going into this week. Let's say.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And,
were you gonna say something, Orion?
I'm actually surprised to see that. Again, this was mentioned earlier, but there's hasn't been really any Dragon Paladins, but there also haven't been any Control Paladins, because I noticed there were quite a few tools that kind of buffed the Control Paladin archetype, or opens.
Yeah,
sorry.
there were.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having a bit of lag here, so I didn't know if I should keep talking or not.
Yeah, it's actually the Skype call lagging, but
okay.
So we can go ahead and finish up then, so this lag doesn't bother anyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, Control Pally, check it out.
Yeah, Control Pally, check it out. Try to play with it. I haven't seen it myself, but I'll check it out too. So.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Hope we could inform you of anything you need to be informed about our meta, and I hope that we gave you some knowledge that you didn't have before. That's kind of what we want to do with this, is just help everyone improve as players and get to know the meta a little better, since TempoStorm.com sucks. So I hope we can do better. Cool. So thanks again, and I hope to see you all register for next week's tournament on Sunday at 5:30. Sergeant Balance here with Manny Iota and